Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage NASCIO President James Collins.
Jamming out a little bit, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the afternoon session. You guys doing okay out there? All righty. Listen, we got a great panel coming at you as we celebrate 50 years of NASCIO. We look to the future and explore what the role of the CIO will play as a catalyst and convener to drive innovation. Am I good now? All right, to drive innovation. So especially as you think about the session that we had earlier, what will the role of the CIO be in driving innovation in that future? Results from NASCIO and Accenture study will reveal insights and best practices around the three pillars of innovation: enabling capabilities, people, policy, and process, and service delivery. The panel is moderated by Eric Sweden, NASCIO's Program Director for Enterprise Architecture and Governance, and Eric is joined by Jim Weaver, the CIO for the state of Washington, Calvin Rhodes, the CIO for the state of Georgia, and Rick Webb, Managing Director, State, Providential, and Local Government for Accenture. As the panelists make their way to the stage, please enjoy a brief video introducing this great work.
Very good. Well, that is an impressive video. I got to tell you, it always inspires me. But NASCIO has been about innovation for some time. I'm going to go to that first slide, please. I want to give you some examples of where innovation shows up in what we do. It's in our mission statement. So in our mission statement, we are saying, promote adoption of IT best practices and innovations. We have 3 award categories with that word in it. Number 1, business process innovations. Second one, information communication technology innovation, emerging innovative technologies. So we're always looking for innovation through our awards program, and I would strongly recommend you always go out to that archive of past awards for ideas, not just the winners. Every one of those submitted technology descriptions is a winner. Now, what we did here is we started a project. A good friend of ours, Mr. Rick Webb of Accenture, came to us and said, hey, why don't we do a project on innovation in the future of the CIO? He presented that to Doug. He presented that to the executive committee, and it was approved. And so we started this research project with Accenture. And as part of that research project, we have this panel, but we've run interviews in San Antonio. We did a survey. We got 35 responses on that survey. Thank you very much. And we're doing in-depth interviews now. We've got 9 under our belt, I believe, Rick,
right.
And some more to go. But we're pulling all that data together from you all, and we're trying to understand this whole subject area of innovation and where's it headed in the future. So as we move into that, we have a great set of panelists here. Now, Calvin Rhodes has done something I don't think I've seen with any other CIO. He's been tasked with a huge project, and that is to lead the construction of the Georgia Cyber Innovation and Training Center in Augusta, Georgia. So that's the architecture, the network, the organization. That's a big project, and that was handed to Calvin because of the credibility he has and the confidence the governor has in him. We've got also with us Jim Weaver. Now he's bringing perspectives from 2 states. He was Deputy CIO for Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, reporting to John McMillan, and now he's the CIO for the great state of Washington. And Washington and Pennsylvania have been doing wonderful things, so we've got that perspective. Then we've got Rick Webb, who was a CIO for North Carolina, and then moved to the corporate world, and he's with Accenture. Accenture has multiple innovation labs. So, I mean, this panel is perfect for what we're trying to do. And then, of course, little old me, I'm just hanging along for the ride. But anyway, one of the things we want to do is talk about what is innovation. And what I'd like to do is ask all of our panelists how they define innovation. I'm going to start with Rick. And Rick, when you tell us your definition, would you read what you had? You showed me earlier. I think that is a great definition. But there's something else I want you to do. You had a situation when you were CIO for North Carolina, and you were trying to work with the emergency response people.
Oh, yeah.
And you did things that I think are outstanding. Would you tell that story after your definition?
Well, thank you, Eric, and thank all of you for being here. We're the group between you and the bar here later, so hopefully we can make this interesting. And I think the real challenge here is how to, as CIOs, how do we keep the lights on while we try to do new things? And it's just a very challenging thing. I wrote this down because when you look in the definitions of innovation, you get all kinds of things. But to me, innovation is investing the time to integrate or even reinvent processes, people, and technology in order to speed up your organization's ability to make impactful changes on the right things at the right time. And that's really what I think it's about. In our world at Accenture, I mean, quite frankly, we are constantly trying to stay ahead of the curve. The competitive advantage is fleeting, so we're always trying to reinvent the things around us in order to survive as a company. And so one of the things that we've done is create innovation labs in most of our locations. I know I've had Calvin buy the one in Atlanta, Georgia, right at Tech Square. But it's always thinking about the new things. The story you're telling, and I'll be really quick on this, when I was CIO, I really wanted to help the emergency management people. We had Hurricane Floyd come through. It's the 500-year flood, the worst flood we'd ever had in North Carolina. And for some reason, the emergency management folks didn't want the state CIO in the room. So one of the things I did, and I worked, interestingly, did not even know Eric Boyette at the time, but Eric was the CIO at transportation, or was involved in transportation. And in that 500-year flood, we had 57 people that were killed, most of them, interestingly, drowned on interstate highways. And so we went, and as head of the GIS board, we went working with the Department of Transportation and built GIS mapping, got it to the television stations, got it to the emergency management people. And interestingly, that's how basically people could figure out where they could go and couldn't go. And it was interesting, by doing something at that time, years ago, which was somewhat innovative, we got into the room and we did a partnership with them, and quite frankly, Eric's very much involved with them to this day. But it's really about finding things that we can bring back that add value and that we can measure and are actionable.
Very good, thank you. James, how are you defining innovation? And I want to ask you specifically, is innovation some kind of big bang step function thing where we're making a huge leap? What do you consider an innovation?
So when I talk about innovation, first off, I don't have any good stories like this guy. Wow. When I talk about innovation, to me, it's really about driving change to achieve business outcomes. It's about taking some ideas. It's about acting on some ideas. And it's also about, to Rick's point, assessing the outcomes of those ideas. And then basically it's a wash, rinse, repeat type activity. As a community, we've been doing innovation for, well, at least 50 years, if not more, as evidenced in that video. But innovation is not the one big step for mankind. If we want to go back to the 1969 theme, to me, innovation has occurred in incremental, measurable steps. It allows for the cultural change to occur that needs to support it as well. And if we make this too big of a leap, what I've seen in my past experience is the ideas crumble very quickly. So we have to do this in a manner that we can incrementally do it. We have to be able to measure that success, and that helps sustain and gets our credibility for future opportunities.
Very good. And then, Kelvin, I want to ask you specifically, particularly given the fact that the mission of this great initiative you led has these words in it: to lead a revolution in cybersecurity through unprecedented collaboration and innovation, creating what? An ecosystem.
Yes. Well, and I think that was one of the things, as we've talked quite a bit about, is pulling the right partners, as we've coined it, just trying to create the right ecosystem that would be innovative in its approaches. And you mentioned the initiative put in front of us, from concept to opening the doors, where the governor had challenged us to do something in 387 days, which no state facility had been designed,
First one?
procured, and all in that short of a time frame. And so that forced us to think outside the box and to do things differently. So I think when you're thinking about innovation, oftentimes leadership really has to push the culture to embrace doing things differently. And also the governor gave us the cover of knowing that we would make mistakes along the way, that was okay. He's like, I need you to be 80% correct, but we will make decisions along the way to try to take care of that other 20%. And then, of course, as I'm sure we'll talk some about, is having the funding to do it. Really made it something that our team embraced and got behind, and it was really ended up being a lot of fun, even though there was a bunch of stress along the way. But I think in the end of the day, delivering a project was innovative, but the end result was what we were going to do at that point to help the people that we were there to serve and try to make sure we were meeting the stakeholders' needs.
And I think that's a key theme throughout this report, this discussion, what we're focusing on. And I like the term I heard from Jim, human-centric design, and then Rick echoed it earlier too. I say it differently: human beings helping human beings achieve outcomes for human beings. So the whole idea here is it's people-centric. Innovation's not for the sake of engaging technology just because it's so cool. I mean, that's part of the discovery experimentation. But we're looking for real outcomes for citizens and solving real problems, exploiting real opportunities. Let's look at some of the data that we in Accenture pulled from the survey. Here's some of the things. Okay, so CIOs, according to these bar charts, they see innovation as a major part of their job. You could see 40% are saying, yeah, it's very important. 43% important. And then over here, we're saying, well, how would you rate the amount or the scale of activity? Only 14% say extensively. Now, either that's a gap or it does make sense. And part of the gap may be, well, if it's important, why don't we have more activity? On the other hand, it's important, but the kinds of activity a CIO does relative to innovation may be different. They may be more leadership. But as you look at those results, let me begin with Rick. How do you interpret those results? Do you see a gap, or do you see it supporting? What do you
Well, I think first off, just as we've learned from the CIO as a broker initiative, there's a lot of forces out there: the political forces, customer forces, the inertia of government in general are challenging, and so I think this is hard. It's not easy. One of the things that I think is very important that CIOs face is this whole thing of risk aversion, that people just don't want to take on risk. From the interviews that we did with CIOs, this seemed to be one of the leading challenges: is how do we get people from easily saying no to getting to the hard answer of saying yes. Yeah. So I think risk aversion is a big part of that, overcoming those. But I do think it's just as we see in the private sector, the demand to innovate, to survive, I honestly think we've got to create that innovation culture that begins to think differently of how we can really turn things. So sometimes in government, it's like I used to say, it's like turning the battleship in the Panama Canal to get people excited about some of these things because they're so risk averse. So I think that's one thing, is how do we begin to build teams that think differently and get involved in that.
Right. James, how are you responding to that? What do you think about that data? Is it conflictory, or does it support each other?
No, I think in public sector, unlike our private sector brothers and sisters, we don't have the opportunity to fail. And I think that going back to the risk aversion that Rick mentioned, there is a very much of a culture to be risk adverse.
Yeah.
And part of our challenge as leaders is to begin to work at that culture and start influencing that culture change and start enabling our staff and our peers to become a little bit more bolder, take some educated risks, and try something new.
Yeah.
And do it in a manner that if in fact it is not working out, the harm is not there for the better good. We can still regroup and go in a different direction. Right. So as I look at those numbers there, I can see myself exactly kind of in that. I feel it's very important, but at the same time, I also am in a culture right now that is risk averse.
Yeah.
And so the likelihood of being able to go with that next greatest idea, push it through, isn't really there. One of the things I had to learn is to slow down to move faster. And that was because of the culture.
Right. Calvin, what's your reaction?
I agree with what's been said here. I think something that's a little different for us is our model that we operate within. With our relationship with service providers, I think that does give us a little bit of an edge to work through them and to try to take some additional risk, because we've tried to build the innovation into some of those agreements, and we know that all of them are not going to work out. But again, bringing some of that mindset to the table that helps us figure out the least risk way to go about attacking that, I think is very important. And then it brings additional skill sets for something that maybe we really don't have, which can even add a greater risk if we were trying to go on our own. And so I think we've found some great success in some areas in trying to move. And thinking of the technology piece, quite often with innovation, it's not about the technology, especially at first. It's really about what problem are we trying to solve, and then in that problem solving, how can we do that in a very unique and different way? And so trying to make sure that again, we're thinking differently, that we're bringing the right people to the table to help us address things in a more efficient way if we're trying to save money, or if we're trying to save citizens standing in line some time about getting their driver's license or whatever the issue might be.
Well, in your model, CIO's broker, by the way, this whole CIO's broker initiative you've been reading about, that started with a conversation with Kelvin, Dr. Steve Nichols, and Dean Johnson in a parking ramp escaping a tornado. And we were talking about what they were doing in Georgia, and what you've done, Kelvin, you've really brought your corporate partners kind of into state government, so that there's almost a fuzzy boundary between you and your trusted corporate partners. And in fact, is not their innovation efforts then something that in an abstract way becomes your innovation lab?
You could certainly look at it that way. I think our view is we're one collective team. We're trying to achieve certain goals and objectives. Some of those align directly with what the governor's trying to accomplish. Others are just some of the day-to-day IT operations that you're trying to make sure is reliable, safe, and secure. And so I think that partnership, in my view, is something where the market is moving. Our service providers, they get scored, if you will, on how they're helping us be innovative. And that has really, again, we mentioned it earlier, is it's really about trying to shift a culture to be able to look for innovative ways, and again, ultimately to make our interaction with citizens better.
Right. Something I want to do at this point is show the results of your response to our question. Could we bring up those results, the bar charts? And I'd like some reaction to that graph. Essentially, we asked the question, what's the primary role of the state CIO relative to innovation. So bring up that bar chart.
Yeah.
Well, I've got the results right here, so I can read them to you. So here's what it is. The first thing we were asking was, the first choice was not part of the state CIO portfolio. No one voted for that. So obviously you all think it is part of the CIO portfolio.
It's up on the screen.
And then driver, look at there we go. Thank you very much. Okay, driver, 27% consider the CIO the driver. And the enabler, another 27%. But this is interesting. Convener of funds, not. Evaluator of the readiness of technology. You're going out there and looking at the landscape, what's ready for prime time, maybe running experiments, not. Okay, we go back, can we keep that up for a little bit? Okay, and then this one is really big, and you've heard it from our panelists. Changing the culture, influencing people, and we're going to go into some of the skills that we need for future, not only for the workforce, but for the CIO. Leader of organizational and cultural change to support an innovative ecosystem. In other words, the whole organization is thinking in an innovative mindset. Thank you for showing that bar chart. We can move on. I want to get into another part of this, but what's your reaction to those results? Do they line up with what you think? Kelvin, what do you think?
I agree with them 100%. I think from trying to drive what we're trying to achieve in our roles, it's the executive leadership that not only that we're trying to bring, but also the style, the leadership of the governor.
Right.
And how can we complement that to achieve what his or her objectives are. I really think that, as we try to have a more open environment for people to be able to share their ideas, all of them are not going to be good. And I think that really tests, if you're trying to develop a culture of innovation in your organization, how you handle the bad ideas.
Yeah,
because
you've got to still welcome
if you
them.
shut those down, you're going to get less and less items brought to you. But also trying to take those ideas and maybe through questions, point them in a direction that would work, or certainly have the opportunity to change your mind. Maybe you're not seeing something.
Or maybe it's not ready for it, right?
Correct.
Jim, how about the fact that we're seeing funding and not getting a lot of votes and evaluating emerging technology? What's your reaction to that?
Well,
is that how you operate?
Yeah, because what I would see there, and I don't disagree with those polling results, I probably would answer it along the same way, is the fact that we are there to enable the business. And so I'm thinking of one specific example in my state where the governor's office looked at me and said, this is going to be your project, Jim. And I said, respectfully, no. This is a business process reengineering project. It's a business transformation. It's not about me. I'm the guy behind the scenes making the opportunities occur. Right, and that's the role I will play. I will be back there, and I euphemistically say with my pom-poms, jumping up and down, rooting everybody on, making things happen, but it has to be coming from the business side of the house for this project to be successful.
Right.
If it's seen as a technology project, it comes under all kinds of additional oversight and scrutiny, and more than likely it will not be innovative any longer.
Right. A lot of states just can't have an innovation lab. So Rick, you've got all of this investment in technology. As I said, your business model has to continue to evolve so you're relevant. So do you, in fact, become the innovation laboratory for some states?
I think there's the leveraging with the private sector for all of us in this room to be able to build that partnership from time to time. We really are going from the idea of we have a solution looking for a problem to how do we really collaborate. Now, if you talk about the funding issue, for example, collaboration is a key part to that. I don't know that the CIO will ever have the money to do the innovation they want to do, so it's a collaboration with agencies. It's a collaboration with private sector partners. And quite frankly, it can be a collaboration with citizens, which is a big part we'll talk about today, because in the end, it's really about how do we make government operate better from a service and from a citizen impact position. So, we really are talking about outcomes. So I do think you can leverage the ecosystem of the private sector. I think you can, and that's something we want to do, I'm sure, and others in this room want to do. I think you also can begin to build those bridges to agencies. And when you really start thinking about this as it's really not about the agency, which is the client of the CIO, but it's the client's client.
Right.
It's really about how do we educate people, how do we make our highways safer, how do we really do the kinds of things that make a better life for our citizens?
You know what I'd call that? Human-centric design. You ever hear that term? Here's some of the things we heard from those surveys and interviews. People were talking about, well, how do you get there? And interestingly enough, barriers are also capabilities. So in other words, executive support, it's a barrier. Well, if you got it, it's an enabler, right? So we're going to look at a few of these, not all of them. So stay tuned for our report because it's going to have a lot of information in it. But anyway, we're going to look at a few. Here's one. Executive support. Innovation as a stated administrative priority can help enable innovation. Now, in state government, we've got two areas where we need support. And, I was talking to our panelists a week ago about all this, and Rick had this great insight into, what does it take as a CIO to deal with, you've got a legislature and you've got an executive branch administration. CIO, tell us a little bit about how does a CIO deal with that? What are the dynamics that they must be aware of, and how do they exploit it?
Well, I think the dynamics are real. It's just like we talked about earlier. The political forces are real. The customer demands are real from the agencies. And so it's really back to the broker concept of having the kind of collaboration and leadership skills necessary to balance that. And I think it's a balancing act. You work for an administration and you adhere to what the administration wants to do, but you need the support of the legislature, you need the support of the agencies. So really, it's really being able to traverse through troubled waters many times to be able to build that kind of collaboration and partnership. I remember my Governor Hunt, many years ago, never liked technology. He was an education governor, he was an economic development governor. And one time I took the governing study to him because I was trying to figure out an angle to get him excited. And I showed him in Governing Magazine that we got a C+. And I'll never forget Governor Hunt looking over his glasses and saying, "Rick, now you know a C+ is not very good. How do we get our technology to an A?" So it's part of how do we begin to think through and how do we package. I was talking to leadership in Florida yesterday, and they're looking at how do they package these things so legislators better understand what it is we're really trying to do. It's not about the technology. It's about what's the problem we're trying to solve, as Calvin mentioned.
Outcomes, right. Jim, what are you facing? You've been in 2 states. Is the dynamic different in the states you've been in?
Yes, very much so. So I'll talk specifically about Washington. So in Washington, the legislature plays more of a role in the decision-making process as opposed to the administration. Clearly, governor is in charge of the executive branch, but the spending authority is with the legislature. Okay. I have 4 members seated as part of our technology services board from the legislature, and more than likely I am talking about technology with the legislature because I'm very fortunate. It's a double-edged sword. Very fortunate to have 2 oversight committees that are technology savvy. We have a part-time legislature in the state of Washington, but many of the legislators work for tech firms. Some of them you may have heard of. And so the types of questions that I get asked are a little bit different. I'm not there in an education role. In many ways, I'm there answering questions as far as why are we doing this way, why aren't we doing this way, why aren't we doing this across an enterprise architecture perspective. So it's a totally different environment as far as that goes. But at the same time, when we have the conversations with the legislature, and going back to that human-centric design, when you can start telling the story from the human aspect, and you can take that story to them from the resident or the citizen's perspective, that's now their voters. And all of a sudden now it has a different impact and a different meaning to them, as opposed to the technology guy sitting there giving all these examples. If we can bring it home with examples of personas or people, things they can relate to as they go back to their respective districts, the conversation's totally different. And for the most part, we get pretty well supported from our legislature, but they are looking for change. They're not looking for the status quo any longer. And our last biennium, they made that very clear to us in our budget.
Right. Kelvin, how about you? Got two helpers, two inhibitors.
Right. Well, and I'll also add that I think your model contributes to how you're going to, interact within getting executive support. So think about it in our federated model at the application layer. I handle that, trying to get that support very differently from the network and infrastructure layer that we own. I think that there's certainly lots of opportunity to build the relationships. Ed mentioned that in the earlier session today, how important those are as we're trying to get that executive support. When I try to compare this to the executive support for the Cyber Center that you mentioned, that was not a technology effort from the governor's viewpoint. It was an economic development. It was a workforce initiative. And then we were going to use this technology to help support that broader initiative. So, and I think, we would have made a great mistake coming in to try to build upon that support that was already there had we tried to turn it into a technology play. And again, just tried to be supportive. And that was really key in getting the right stakeholders around the table to where we focused on the business needs and not the technology.
And clearly he saw that was your perspective, and that's why he tasked you with such a mammoth project.
Well, and relate to Jim, that his two different states are different. So I've transitioned to a new governor, and how they manage is very different. My earlier governor gave a very high-level vision and expected you to go accomplish it, whereas this governor is younger, embraces technology more, and is really wanting to understand and have some input into the detail. So very different environments to operate within.
And you got to be able to maneuver. Let's look at this next set of data. So this presents two of these things. Recall from that other slide we were saying funding is important, new skills. Well, what kind of skills? So what are the top barriers to implementing innovative initiatives? Lack of funding, skills of the workforce. And then we've got the second question, does your CIO organization have the funds dedicated to innovation? A couple of questions here. What are these skills that are missing? Exactly what are we trying to bring into the workforce so they're ready for innovation? I'll start with you, Kelvin.
I'll relate it to cybersecurity. So if you hear me talk very often, I have my go-to line, which is, the fast pace of technology is changing at the fastest rate in my lifetime. And today is probably the slowest it will be in my lifetime. And so when you really think about how do we try to have the skill sets that the students in college today will probably use skills that they won't even learn in their environment today by the time they graduate in just a few years. So it's changing at that pace. And so I think, again, I believe Georgia's in a little bit better place because I rely on my vendor community through the outsourced model to find those skill sets as we need them. I can't afford to put on the state payroll a data scientist, but when we need them, I have avenues to get them very quickly through that outsourcing arrangement, and they're there for the time that we need them, and then they go elsewhere. So.
Yeah. Now I need to move along, so I want to switch to a different question for you, Jim. As you look at this funding, does your organization have funds? What are we funding? What exactly do we need funds for that would be designated innovation? What would that be?
See, and there's an area I honestly, Eric, I would struggle in, because to me, I would be going after funding to support business needs and business objectives. It's not about bringing in the latest technological item or doing something along those lines. So I don't see funding as a barrier necessarily, but it's more or less being able to articulate a good business case of what it is we're trying to do and what are the outcomes we're going to try to achieve, and going after the funding in that manner.
Okay, very good. Rick, any perspectives on either one of those?
No, I just think that clearly it's as you begin to think about the emerging technologies and the skills necessary, it's beginning to leverage the private sector more and more ecosystem partners that can help you bridge those gaps.
Right.
There's no way that government, I think, can scale quickly and fast enough to do the kind of things as fast as things are coming at them. So how do you leverage the private sector? How do you begin to think differently about some of those models? And so
that's
shared services models make a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Calvin's come a long way in Georgia and the things they're doing. And then how do you begin to push that out more so that you can get to the new things? The other thing is, it's okay. One of the things we do in government in our command control mentality is this ability that we can never fail. And failure in innovation has to be an option because you learn from failure.
Correct. Yeah.
So I think part of this is being able to create another lane, another way of testing and trying new things with the idea that you're going to learn from that process. Building that in, and it all goes back to the one thing we've talked about, is the innovation culture is critical, and you have to be able to build that in your internal organization if you're going to be able to do those kind of things. And that's hard work.
Yes, absolutely. I'm going to move on to this term we brought up earlier in this discussion was the broad ecosystem of innovation. And this is an interesting set of data because as you've heard from Jim and Rick and Kelvin, you know, we're talking about innovation. Primarily, we're trying to solve real problems or exploit real opportunities. So not innovation just for the sake of innovation. We don't want an innovation badge. We want to solve problems. We want to achieve outcomes. So in this set of questions, we said, how does your organization measure outcomes? Well, the primary measure is improved citizen outcomes, reduced cost. Look at the third one, increased citizen satisfaction. So citizen is showing up in two of these metrics. Now, we've got more metrics in the survey than this, but these are the number one metrics. But then look over to the other side. What methods do you use to spur innovation? Well, 14% are looking for input from citizens. Kelvin, what do you think about those results? Is that today only, or is that going to change in future?
I hope it changes. I think we certainly have struggled with, initiatives coming down the road, and you're typically by the time the procurement is complete, you're already crunched on your completion date, and trying to really take the time to get that citizen input is one of the things that I think we tend to wish we had time to do it, and we move on. And so I think in some of the areas that we can point to where we made sure that the citizen input was there, we've ended up with much better outcomes. Right. And we had a group of individuals that we could go to through the project to make sure we were staying on course.
Good.
And so with our portal development, the Kills team, that was part of the project plan, and it was a very focused area. And I know with my opposite extreme with our redevelopment of a driver's license system, that project had a procurement issue, so then there was just really no citizen input with it. And so I think some of the opportunities that we had to improve throughput and some of those things was afterthought versus being a part of the project.
I want to go to Rick, because Rick, you used to bring, you brought this up in a number of conversations with me. You have a mantra in Accenture about clients and their...
Well, the clients,
yeah.
Right? I think, though, we took some look at some research that we've done in the U.S., and around 75% of all citizens want their governments to innovate. They want them to use, improved ways of delivering services. And one survey said 79% of citizens feel the government should use new technologies to save money and improve service quality. So citizens are demanding it. But one of the things we need to do, it's a very novel idea. Why don't we ask them what they think? Right? So part of that is beginning to reach out and really talk to citizens, bring them in focus groups, talk to them about what really matters to them, and build that into our plan. Because in
Rick,
the end, it's their outcomes.
That brings us to the next slide. Thank you very much. I mean, look at this one. Okay, impact on citizens is critical when measuring success, but they are frequently not engaged. Now, in this slide, we're saying how frequently do you co-create? This is getting back to that agile attitude, right? Jim, you folks in Washington are agile leaders. So when you look at this and you see citizens are never engaged, or not very often. You know, I mean, look at the citizens on the far right. Have you been able to break through that with your agile approaches, actually pull them in to sprints and epics and whatever else you're doing?
Not yet, but I think we're really at the cusp now of being able to do that. I think the theme and the message is starting to resonate within our cabinet members who are providing critical services to our residents, that it's very key. And it's ironic that some of them are actually engaging in some of those services because they might be a small business owner, have to pay taxes, whatever the case may be, and they're now starting to better understand that the way things have been created in the past isn't necessarily with the positive outcome of being engaged from a consumer perspective. So we're leveraging that opportunity now to actually start having those conversations to, instead of trying to tell the residents of the state, this is what you want and this is how you're going to engage it, it's having them come back to us now and start saying,
Perfect.
this is how we want to engage and these are the services we want to do. So kind of give them that Amazonian experience, if you will. You don't need to know the whole breadth of government. I just want to know the little slices of pie I deal with and deal with them in a singular, constructive manner.
Very good. That's great. Kelvin, what's your reaction looking at this? Is there a time in your future where you see citizens coming right into project plans, being part of the project team?
I do, because our new governor has created a Georgia First Commission, and so he's, again, we talked about we've got to move from it being a project item to it's the culture. And so there's a group of private citizens that meet, and they're looking across all of state government. One of the first areas they're working on is the small business, where a small business owner would have to come and interact with a number of state agencies. But then this group's asking, I really don't care if it's state or city or county. I want to come to one place, and I should be able to see all the things I'm required to do to be able to open a business. And so, so that challenge is there, and it's really trying to push the culture to move in that direction.
Very good.
And as I say, they're looking across all of state government, so it's not just focused in that one area.
So let's look at this question real brief, because I want to get into futures. How do you create a culture? Is there some kind of a recipe you can take, a path you can take to promote an innovative culture? Rick, let's start with you.
I think there's four things. One is, number one, the art of listening. It's a novel thing, but listening both internally and externally is a critical part of that. I think the other is to stay open. Ideas don't always come from experts. Some of the greatest ideas, like we heard this morning in the keynote session, come from within the organization. Collaborate, collaborate, collaborate. And it's really about building and developing new innovation. And then the last thing I think is to be nimble. We really make things too bureaucratic, and the check the box mentality is, and particularly in government, is one that we just never get there. So flattening organizations, being nimble, and thinking out of the box here are critical. That's the culture. It's hard, but that's the culture you've got to create from the bottom up and the top down.
Right. Jim, how do you do that? And have you come up with maybe the approach that's possibly unique to the state of Washington, promoting the concept of we're all building the cathedral, everyone's part of this innovation ecosystem?
Right. So a lot of it, from my perspective, and in the agency I walked into, it was really, to Rick's point, was changing that culture. And changing the culture was really about, first off, understanding the word fail means first attempt at learning. Don't be afraid to fail. Secondly was, you're empowered. Go do some things. And we'll set up the framework, if you will, for you to go operate within, but go do some things, try it, see what happens. Don't be afraid to fail. And then thirdly is, don't come with the answer, this is how we've always done it. That's like the nails on the chalkboard, so to speak, right? Is don't come with that as the answer. Sometimes that could be the answer, but it should not be the default answer. And before you arrive to that conclusion, what else have we done to investigate, to look at doing some things a little bit differently? And then lastly, I would say is, don't set the bar low.
Reach.
Again, reach. I had a member of my staff, one of my direct reports, telling me, Jim, you're planning a trip to the Mars, and we haven't been to the moon yet. And I said, why aren't you let's go.
Why are we stopping at?
Why are we stopping, right? Do we need to go to the moon? Can't we just go right to Mars, right? So it's kind of that approach. So
Yeah.
that's kind of the enthusiasm, the spirit, and the continuous encouragement that we're trying to do.
Good.
Not only within our agency, but now that's going outside the agency to the other agencies in the
It takes
state.
a lot of inspiration
Yes.
on your part to build that. I'm going to move on because we're running out of time. We're looking at the future. I want to start with you, Calvin. Okay, so we've talked a lot about creating this culture, this ecosystem. We've had some very inspiring presentations in our general sessions. As you look to the future, Calvin, what do you see the CIO role looking like? Is it going to be really different from what it is today?
I still think it's going to be the trust factor, that have earned the trust of those that I'm working with, especially with other agency heads who have very specific missions and problems that they're trying to solve. I think it's also a collaboration with our team and our service providers or vendor partners. They often bring us new ideas that some fit and some don't, but at least we're learning and trying to, and I think that will become even greater as this pace of technology continues to change. And then I think as the CIO is a broker, that our job will be to try to pull all those pieces together and connect them, and so that we can do things more efficiently. One of the things I wanted to mention earlier is as we are trying to find efficiencies within our own organization, I look at 10 years ago, we were spending about $250 million a year at the infrastructure layer, network layer. Today, that number is around $197 million. So those dollars that have come out with all the growth that's gone on has allowed us to invest some of that in innovation and trying to help agencies, again, be either more secure or help them improve their systems and all. So I think that helps you earn the right to do some of the other things and to earn their trust when they know you're truly there trying to help them solve problems.
Very good, Calvin. Jim, what's your look to the future? What's your crystal ball telling you?
I'm going to echo a lot of things Calvin just said. It's about trust. It's about the relationship. It's about demonstrating the capabilities of being a valued partner with them and helping to solve very much needed business problems. Likewise, I see us transitioning to a broker model. We should not be in that more day-to-day operational model. There's a lot of entities that can do it much better than we can. Let's go focus on the areas that we can bring value back to our business and to our state agency partners, and I really think that is that broker model.
Very good. Rick, you hear all what we've heard from Calvin and Jim, and you're the one who's going to be provisioning, and as well as our corporate partners out there. How do you see yourself engaging in that vision? They're staying with, we're playing ball the way we used to. We're trying to solve problems and have human outcomes. You're going to engage.
Yeah, I think the first thing is make sure we truly understand the business of our customers and understand what the needs are. That's one of the wonderful things about the CIO survey and the top 10, and is we use NASCIO in this organization as a way to gauge what the needs are. The last thing Calvin wants me to do or Jim wants me to do is to walk in and ask them what's keeping them awake at night, right? They want to know that I've looked at their strategic plan. They want to know that I'm aware of where I play well and where I don't. So it's almost a corporate self-awareness that's critically important to them to understand where we can be helpful. We can't do all things, but we're really good at lots of things. And so it's making that kind of match and doing it in a way that we can be successful, because let's face it, we have to all think differently. It's kind of like what I used to say about the man and the mosquito, right? The man says, get the mosquito off my back. The mosquito says, get the man out of my face, right? So we've got to think like the mosquito and look at it differently.
Yeah, good different perspectives. You panelists have done a great job. Would you give them a hand for their great contribution here? Thank you so very much. And thank you for being here on Tuesday afternoon, when a lot of people go. That is it for this session. Thank you. Stay tuned for our report.
Wow. Good job, guys.